Thank you for the introduction, Sean. My name is Jerry Johnson. I'm the general manager of the Xbox Live Studios located in London. And my background at Microsoft is I've been there for about 12 years. The last 8 years have been on Xbox Live. I started right at the month that Live launched in November of 2002. And it's been a privilege to actually be part of this and actually be part of the growth as Xbox Live made it through these last 8 years. When I was talking to Sean, Sean said, why don't you come over, we'd like you to talk. I asked him, what would be something to go over? What would you think the crowd would be interested in? And Sean said, just talk about Live. Come up, talk about some of the methodologies, some of the things, some of the experiences over the past 8 years. And give a little background and also show a little bit where it's going. I titled the talk, Transforming the Living Room Entertainment. When I called it this, it's more about the methodology and what we were thinking about when we first started Live back in 2002. We talk about, excuse me. We talk about trends in the living room, and there were really 3 themes that we focused on when we launched Live. We took a look at what was going on with mass entertainment in the living room, and when I talk about mass entertainment, we're talking about television, music, and movies. We also, of course, focused on the trends of interactive gaming in the living room, and also what it meant as social networking was coming online. So, when we talk about transforming the living room, why were we picking the living room? Well, first of all, when we think about the living room, it is the most comfortable room in the house. It's where you have softest furniture, it's where your couch is, it's where people come to relax. It's also where you have the best audio-visual gear. It's where your biggest TV is, it's where your hi-fi is, it's where all your electronics and your devices are. And probably most importantly, it's also the most social room in the house. It's where people get together, it's where when you have family and friends over, you hang out. So, as we talk about the living room, there's an interesting discussion that comes around, and it has to do with if the living room is actually an active or a passive place. A couple months ago, we were having a dinner party at our house, and we had the opportunity, there was an investment banker over, somebody that worked for a large investment bank in London. I knew he worked for this investment bank, he knew I worked for Microsoft. We had no idea the details of what each of us did. So as we were having drinks, and this really isn't him, he's actually a Suave Bola Italian, 35-year-old guy, perfect hair, the guy that all the wives wanted to talk to at the party. But as we started to talk to each other, we had Last FM up and running in the background on the TV. And he came up and he's like, you know, how did you get Last FM on your TV? So we started talking, I explained to him that I work for Microsoft, work for Xbox Live, and that one of the products that we brought on is bringing Last FM right into the living room. And it turns out he was a media analyst at this large investment bank. So in the media industry, his job was to go through and identify where companies should be investing in. I explained to him some of the things that we were doing around Live. I showed him a little bit of this work we had done with Sky, and started to try to talk to him, and we were having a discussion around what it really means to have interactive experiences wrapped around mass media entertainment. The thing that struck me is as we started to get into this discussion and we walked through some of the things that we were doing with Sky, he flat out said, people don't want to be active in the living room. And I was kind of floored by it at first, and as we started to walk through it, I expected him to start to talk about the economics of scale, rights around content, what the content producers really wanted to do. But in the end, he came back and said, no, people just want to sit in the couch and have content flow over them. They have no desire to actually interact with it. And I think for most people in this room, that's a completely foreign concept. Same living room, a couple weeks later, this is my daughter, and this is really her. She's 13 years old. We're sitting in that same living room, and we were watching a movie on TV. We had the whole family up there, brother, sister, her mom. And as we watched this show, we were watching a movie, The Man in the Iron Mask. I look over at my daughter, and she's not watching the movie, and she's laughing. And it was a pretty boring part at the beginning of the movie. So I asked Hannah, I'm like, what are you doing? And she looks up at me and she goes, I'm watching Glee on her laptop. And then I said, you are? And she goes, yes. And she's IMing with Lucy, her best friend. And her friend had started Glee at the same time, and they were watching it on their computer in the living room, talking to each other on IM. So I looked at her and I said, well, what's the iPod Touch? She says, I'm also working on my Doodle Jump average score. So I'd like to compare and contrast this view that the living room is not an active place, and then take a look at the future. The future is my daughter. She's sitting there watching 2 movies at the same time, talking to a friend, and playing a game all at the same time. And she switches so quickly between it. As the movie started to pick up, she shut the Glee app down, set her iPod down, and then started watching the movie with the rest of the family. The living room is an active place, and my daughter is the future of the way people are going to interact with entertainment. Not just games, not just television, but all forms of entertainment. So, we talked about transforming entertainment in the living room. So, when we talk about transform, just want to go over the definition really quickly. To completely change the character so that it's actually improved. Now, as we look through those 3 trends, mass media in the living room, gaming entertainment in the living room, and social networking in the living room, I'd like to just walk through a quick history and start talking about some transformative moments. So the date was October 30th, 1938. It was a Halloween evening in the United States. I don't know if many people know this date, but it was a broadcast that occurred over the radio that actually transformed the entire country in the United States. And I'll just play a little excerpt from it.
We now return you to Carl Phillips at Groversville. Ladies and gentlemen, here I am back in Stonewall in George's Wells Garden. From here, I ain't get a sweep of the whole scene. I'll give you every detail as long as I can talk and as long as I can see. More state police will arrive at drawing up the court in front of the pit. I'll tell you nothing. No need to push the crowd back now. They're willing to keep their distance.
So, most people recognize that, and this was Orson Welles actually doing the broadcast of War of the Worlds in 1938. This was a broadcast that only went into about 6 million homes in the end. And it wasn't just a television not just a radio broadcast, but it was actually an entertainment experience that, again, transformed an entire country. And Orson Welles didn't just tell a story, even though it was very well told. He took a look at all the tools that he had and put them together to actually deliver an experience into that living room. He knew that when he was broadcasting this over the Mercury show on CBS, at the same time on NBC radio, the most popular radio show was going on at the exact same time. It was a radio show that he knew the format of because at the beginning of that show it started off with comedy and then it went into music. He knew that the majority of the people that were actually listening to that radio show, at about the 15-minute mark, once the comedy bit was over, were going to come over to his radio show. He also had the benefit of the format of his show had no advertisements. So he had complete control over the cadence and the way he was going to tell his story. He opened up his radio broadcast with the disclaimer that said, this is just a dramatic show. This is not real. Then he opened up with a little bit of narrative, and then went right into a fake music show that then started getting interrupted by news broadcast. He timed the first news broadcast to happen at 12 minutes into the show. The net effect was he was pulling in all the different controls and all these different tools he had to take a linear format of a show into a living room and completely transform it. It showed the power of what could be done with linear entertainment coming into the home to only 6 million listeners. But by the next day, an entire country was entertained, angered, and outraged by what had happened. Again, one of the first very transformative moments when we think about linear programming into the home. So, if we look at the different trends of entertainment coming into the home, again, it started with analog radio. And like I mentioned, it was very highly aggregated. There were only a few broadcasters. People didn't have a lot of choice. They sat in their living room around a wooden box in the evenings and listened to music, variety shows, and news. And it was really the hit content that drove it. As we got into the 40s television emerged. Again, it was just a change in the media. It was still hit-driven. It was a highly aggregated audience. You had 3 primary networks in the United States at the time, and people tuned in for single shows on the programmers' schedules. As we got to the end of that period, a couple things emerged. One was the deregulation of cable in the United States in the 70s. And what happened was, all of a sudden, people had more choices. Cable wasn't just out in the boonies, it actually came into the cities. And MTV, everybody knows how MTV completely transformed the music industry. But there was a chant in the United States that everybody had. And if you were a kid, you were asking your parents, I want my MTV. And what they were really asking for is, I want cable TV in my house. And this is where you actually start to see that aggregated service at least spread. You started to have more choices. And the other thing that happened around the same time is they spun up the whole VHS, the Betamax VHS battle, and VCRs came into the households. The other change that occurred at that point was people got to watch whatever they wanted to, whenever they wanted to. They could go to the video store and rent a video. They could tape shows. They started to have more control over what they were doing. So then the 90s came, and everybody knows the digital revolution. What happened was you went from this only hit-driven, very time-based things, to a disaggregation of the content. People had more choices. We went from a few channels to hundreds of channels to now actually millions of channel choices. And along with these changes as far as the distribution of the content and the choices, we also got into the latest quality and fidelity discussions. It was high def, and we can remember when everybody was arguing over, is it going to be 720p, is it going to be 1080p, is it 1080i? And now everybody knows the battle is around, is 3D here to stay? But if you take a look at what occurred over those past 70 years, not a lot really changed when you think about the way you consume the entertainment, or did the entertainment transform. Rather, what happened is you got better choice and convenience, a lot more options, a lot easier to find content, and the fidelity increased. But in the end, we went from Jack Parr and the $64 question on the radio to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? We went from Chuck Barris and the Gong Show to Simon Cowell and X Factor. We went from War of the Worlds and Orson Welles to James Cameron and Avatar. We got quality, we got choice, but it was still very much a one-way type of delivery of content. So this piece everybody in this room knows extremely well. Gaming's been around since before the 70s, but it was really the advent of the console in the living room that actually brought it to the masses. I remember 1972, the Christmas my dad brought home, and we all got a Pong. For me, that was a transformative moment. My 16-year-old brother and myself, we sat in front of that TV that entire Christmas break doing nothing but turning the paddles, sliding those bumpers up and down, and taking on this entertainment experience like none we've ever experienced before. For me, that was extremely transformative. And in this time, consoles took off in the living room. We had Magnavox introduce the Odyssey, and of course, Atari came in with their series of 2600, 2700 consoles. It was about the end of the 70s that also big business actually started to get involved here. We had the publishers come in. Activision was formed shortly after, Electronic Arts, and they built giant businesses around creating content for the consoles.